Make a presentation, BSBCMM401. The learning outcomes of this unit is to plan and document a presentation approach and intended outcomes, to use presentation aids, materials and examples to support a target audience understanding of key concepts and central ideas. 3, to implement techniques to review the effectiveness of the presentation. 4, to utilise feedback from the audience or from key personnel involved in the presentation to make changes to central ideas presented. The contents of this unit: 1, to prepare a presentation, 2, to deliver that presentation, and 3, to review the presentation. This unit covers skills and knowledge required to prepare, deliver and present the presentation to a target audience. This unit applies to individuals who may be expected to make presentations for a wide range of purposes such as marketing, training and promotions. They contribute well-developed communication skills in presenting a range of concepts and ideas. All right, so let's go through a pre-quiz true or false and see what your base knowledge is. Number 1, the message or messages are delivered by the audience to a presenter. True or false? Evening or weekends are the best time to deliver a presentation. And 3, whiteboards are good for developing an explanation, diagrams, etc. So how do we go with the first one, true or false? False. The message or messages are delivered, in fact, by the presenter to the audience. Number 2, how'd you go? False. In fact, evenings and weekends are not exactly the best time for delivery of presentation. However, it does depend on your target audience. And number 3, whiteboards are good for developing an explanation and ideas. True. They can be great visual aids in order to enhance the understanding of key concepts and also to capture an audience by diagrams. So it is an effective tool, yes. So how did you go? We can have a chat about it a little bit later. All right, prepare a presentation. So what is a presentation? Let's have a look. A presentation is a means of communication that can be adapted to various speaking situations, such as talking in a group, addressing a meeting, or briefing a team. A presentation can also be used as a broad term that encompasses other speaking engagements, like such as making a speech at a wedding, getting your point across in a video conference. Exactly what I'm doing here. Okay, so in your presentation, what is the objective? It is useful to write down the reasons that you have been asked to present so that you can have a constant reminder while you prepare a presentation. There are many reasons for giving a presentation or a talk, but never lose sight of your objective as determined when you were asked or accept the invitation to present. So what is your message? Message is delivered not just by spoken words like verbal communication, but can be augmented by techniques such as voice production, body language, gestures, eye contact, non-verbal communication, and also visual aids. The message will also be affected by the audience's expectations. For example, if you've been billed as speaking on one particular topic, yet you choose to speak on another, the audience is likely to not be well happy about it and it won't meet their expectations. So therefore, it could make your presentation a failure if you don't keep to the point. All right, so what is your subject? The subject of what you're going to talk about comes from the objective, but they are not necessarily one and the same thing. For example, the subject may be given to you by an inviting organisation. You may be acknowledgeable in parts of a field in the presentation, and the subject may be entirely your choice with certain limitations. All right, so you need to have an understanding about your audience, but what does that actually mean? Before preparing any material for a presentation, it is worth considering your prospective audience. Tailoring your talk to your audience is important, and the following points should be considered. So, for example, the size of the group or audience expected, the age range. For example, a talk aimed at retired people would be quite different to one aimed at teenagers. The gender. Will the audience be predominantly male or female? Is it a captive audience, or will they be there out of their interest? Will you be speaking in work time or leisure time? Do they know something about the subject already, or will it be totally new for them? Is the subject part of their work? Are you there to inform, teach, stimulate, or provoke the audience? And can you use humour? And if so, what would be appropriate? Okay, the place or the location. It is important to take as much advanced information as possible about the place in which you're going to speak. Ideally, try and arrange to see the venue before speaking in an event. It is of great benefit that you're familiar with the surroundings as well. And also to help with your nerves. If you can visualize the place when you're preparing for your talk, it can calm those nerves initially. And in addition to that, it also gives you a great opportunity to try out and test out your voice, like how well your voice carries throughout the room. If at all possible, you also need to know the following: the size of the room, the seating arrangements, and if it can be altered, the availability of equipment, for example, microphones, overhead projector, flip charts, computer equipment. I would also mention that Wi-Fi is a very important equipment that you will need to take into consideration. Will that be available, or do you need to bring your own supply? The availability of PowerPoints, and if an extension lead is required for any equipment that you intend to use. All right, the time of the day that you will be presenting, you need to consider these points. For example, in the morning, it's known to be the best time to speak because people are generally the most alert. However, late in the morning may start to present problems as people begin to feel hungry and think about lunch. If you're speaking in the afternoon, early afternoon is not an ideal time to make a presentation, since after lunch people often feel sleepy and a little bit lethargic. Mid-afternoon is a good time, whereas at the end of the afternoon, people may start to worry about getting home, the traffic, or collecting children from work. So they may not be as engaged in your presentation when you're presenting in the late afternoons. Evenings and/or on weekends, outside regular office hours, people are more likely to be present because they want to rather than they have to be there. There is a higher likelihood of the audience attention in the evening, provided, of course, the presentation does not go for too long when people may have to leave before the presentation's finished. So you must take this time into consideration. And again, it always comes back to really knowing who your audience is that you're delivering a presentation to will help you to select the best time of the day. All right, so what's some presentation strategies that you may need to think about? Different ideas can be presented using diagrams, flowcharts, PowerPoint presentations. A good presentation is impressive in a group discussion. The presenter must have body language that is very impressive and not offensive. It shows that the speaker doesn't lack mannerisms. The presenter must have direct eye contact with teammates. This shows confidence. A good presentation skills are very essential in today's competitive environment. Presentation often expresses the speaker's creativity in different forms that leaves an impression on its viewers. Presentation is not just about material on its own, but also about yourself. The way you're dressed is so important as an aspect of the presentation. A good presentation will leave an impact on its audience. It brings out immediate ideas and also brings out the speaker's personality in a unique way. All right, so what are some of these strategies in more detailed points? For example, you could use case studies, demonstrations, whether they be video demonstrations or live demonstrations. Could have built-in discussions, group or paired work, oral presentations, such as the one that you see now, and also questioning as well as part of your presentation strategies. Organise the presentation material. So what will that include? Blue sky thinking or the ideas in which you'll create, selecting the main points, deciding whether to illustrate, and the introduction and conclusion of your presentation. All right, so how do we select these main or key points of our presentation? So at the beginning, it should always be divided into 3 sections. First part being the introduction or the beginning of your presentation. The second part would be the main content or the middle. And lastly, your conclusion, the wrap up or the end of the presentation. A useful structure would be the following. Tell your audience the introduction about what your subject is and how you're going to organise the presentation by stating the key elements. Then tell them in detail about the key elements or the message, expanding and qualifying the key points in more detail and providing supporting evidence. Finally, tell your audience what you've just told them by summarising the main key points and including a main subject again. So how do we work on our main content? From your notes, you should decide what are the most important things that need to be said. If you have too much material, be selective. Now here's a good guide to your presentation. For example, 3 key points are sufficient for a 10-15 minute presentation. 6 key points are sufficient for a 30-minute presentation. And 8 key points are sufficient for a 45-minute presentation. All right, so if you're deciding whether to illustrate, you should take into consideration the following. If a presentation is short or informal, it is probably not necessary to use visual aids. Use visual illustration if anything requires expanding, clarifying, or simplifying. Illustrations of any type should be relevant and fully explained. Also, bear in mind that a talk will last longer if you're using visual aids. So if you have a real time restriction, you have to take this into consideration. All right, so what's the outline of your presentation? Outlining is a very important step to find out what your major points are and what you should be focusing on in your presentation. This process builds the canvas for the actual script and the thought roadmap for your audience and where your presentation's going. Editing your content. When editing your content, you should consider the following. Ensure that the language that you use is appropriate for your audience. Are there any terms that they may not be familiar with? If so, use more familiar terms or explain the meaning so that they do understand. 2, is your language presentation friendly? Presentations that are spoken, so choose to use accessible and easily understood words, such as if you use in a conversation, so it should flow really nicely, rather than technical or obscure words that you wouldn't usually use. Try and eliminate long sentences. Remember that you are talking about your ideas and that the audience will be listening rather than reading. So therefore your sentences on your presentation should be short, structured and simple to ease the audience's understanding. Number 4, use metaphors to aid the understanding and retention. 5, identify ways of grabbing your audience's attention. There are additional visual materials that you could include in your illustration of your key points. And always remember to double check that your presentation slides or illustrations, titles, captions, handouts, or similar are free from spelling mistakes. All right, your title. Winning formulas, the principle for an effective title. Address your specific audience. Being vague or general equals boring. Highlight specific benefits or outcomes they desire. Highlight specific pain they most want to avoid. You can create curiosity and add urgency. Some examples of these could include run, don't walk to the nearest exit. For a speech on the need for atomic energy control. I stutter. For a speech on stuttering and how it can be controlled. And finally, why that lady's a champ. For a speech on female tennis champion stars. Presentation aids and materials. Visual aids help to make a presentation more lively. They can also help the audience to follow your presentation and help you to present your information, which would be difficult to follow through speech alone. I mean, I have a great memory, but if I was to remember all of this off the top of my head, I just wouldn't be able to do it. The 2 most important or the most common forms of visual aid are overhead transparencies or computer slideshows. Now remember, when was the last time you saw an overhead transparency? I remember mine probably in primary school. So the most common these days are more like computer slideshows such as PowerPoint. Objects can be displayed or passed around to the audience, can also be very effective and often help to relax the audience. Some speakers like to give out handouts the audience to follow as they speak, and others prefer to give them out at the end of the talk because they can distract the audience from the actual presentation. Working with visual aids. Before you start, ask yourself the following questions. What is the purpose of this visual aid? Is it to clarify a key point? Is it to provide an illustrative example? Is it to clarify or simplify a model? Is it to summarize or is it to entertain? Now, what are some possible visual aids that I may be able to use? Some of them may include whiteboards or interactive whiteboards, flip chart, overhead projector, slides, videos, PowerPoint or other software presentations, and also handouts. Okay, whiteboards and interactive whiteboards. If available, whiteboards are good for developing explanations, diagrams, simple headings, and for recording interactions, comments from the audience during a brainstorming session. Remember that writing on the whiteboard takes time and you'll have to turn your back on your audience to do so. If using a whiteboard, you should ensure that your handwriting is legible, aligned horizontally, and is sufficiently large to be seen by all audience. I'll give you an example of which I have when I'm writing on the whiteboard in class, terrible handwriting. And it also at times is not aligned horizontally. It sort of goes on a slant. So I don't use whiteboards a lot in class because they can be more of a distraction or a hindrance in my presentations or delivery of a lesson in class. But that's just my example. It's not for everyone. Flip charts. A flip chart is popular, low cost, low tech solution for recording interactive meetings and brainstorming sessions. A flip chart can be prepared in advance and is portable. It requires no power source and no technical expertise. Flip charts are ideal for collecting ideas, responses from the audience, and are good for spontaneous summaries. However, if you have a large audience, a flip chart will be too small to be seen by everyone. So you have to keep that in mind. Now, videos are an excellent source for training purposes, but it can be difficult to fit it into a presentation structure depending on the length of your videos. If a computer connected to a projector is available, then videos can be played as files from a DVD or with an internet connection via YouTube or other online source. Videos can also be built into the presentation using PowerPoint or other presentation software, which you're going to see in the next couple of slides. All right, PowerPoint and Prezi. Use of PowerPoint or other presentation software is very common in presenting today. And I will just say that Prezi, if you haven't used it yet, go on Google and have a look at it. It is a very effective online tool to use and it makes your presentations really pop and quite interactive and engaging. However, care should be taken. Visual aids and effects do not distract or detract from the presentation itself or detract. If you do use PowerPoint, try to have a practice run well in advance of your presentation so that you're confident when giving the presentation itself, mainly to make sure that if you've got videos embedded that they're working, again to check the spelling and also the timing of your presentation as well. You want to check that you're running on time, that you are not too short with your presentation and you're not too long with your presentation. Right, handouts. Handout summary or including main points of a presentation are an excellent addition, but must be relevant. Presentation software packages such as PowerPoint can automatically generate handouts from your presentation slides. Just bear in mind though that you do have regulatory and organisational obligations and requirements And you should take into consideration organizational policies, procedures, visual identity, privacy laws, anti-discrimination law, ethical principles, environmental and workplace health and safety issues. All right, delivering our presentation. Making a presentation puts you on public display. An audience not only listens to your ideas, also responds to the way that you use your voice and your body. You need more than a well-written presentation to make an impact. You will need to deliver it in a lively, flexible, and interesting way. In this leaflet, we will also suggest many ideas for invoking energy in your presentation style. All right, they do say that practice makes perfect. And I will just say to you that it is so important that you practice your presentation. So whether it be standing in front of the mirror, and having a look and practicing in front of the mirror, have a look at how you speak, have a look at your expressions on your face, how you stand. All of this is important when you are delivering your presentation. The more you practice, the more fluid your speech becomes and your presentation gets more relaxing. It also helps that you can hear your voice over. So if ever you have the chance to record your presentation as well, it will highlight how many times you use the word in your sentences as well that you may not pick up when you're in the moment of actually presenting your speech. So it is important to always practice your presentation before you get up in front of people. Making contact with your audience. One of the key challenges faced by the presenter is establishing a link or a connection to his or her audience. A poor presenter appears to be speaking to an empty room. Making contact helps to maintain the audience's interest and encourages them to believe that you are genuinely interested in talking to them. So if you want to create an engaging presentation or deliver an engaging speech to an audience, make eye contact with them, smile, build a beautiful atmosphere in your presentation. And this can include such things as making eye contact, gestures, spoken contact, and the use of your language. Your language is particularly important in developing and sustaining the relationship with your audience. Try using language that involves your audience. For example, asking them questions such as, what have you learned from this? How did we arrive at this conclusion? When you're involving your audience in the exploratory process or discussion, look at your visual aids and then guide them in that process by saying, if we have a look at this slide, or this slide shows us that, use language that is welcoming and involving throughout your presentation. The use of your voice. Our voices are flexible and such a powerful tool. You can use it in many different ways by varying the volume of your voice, the pace, and also the pitch. For example, if I was talking really fast in this presentation, you would not be able to understand a word that I was saying. Therefore, if we just slow down that pace, you can then help to engage your audience and they will understand what you're saying. Always remember to breathe. Steadying your breath helps with your nerves, to be honest. Now, it is A good thing if you get up in front of people and you still get a little bit nervous. That's good, that's healthy. It means that you do care about what you're presenting about and all the time and effort that's gone into it. But if that's the case, you can use good breathing techniques so that you don't sound nervous when you get up to speak to people. So remember to take a deep breath, breathe in, breathe out. And if you make a mistake along the way, do the same thing again and compose yourself. It's all good. We're humans. We make mistakes. But always remember to breathe. All right. Making sure that you drink water is key for your speech as well. Before and when you're warming up or preparing to get in front of an audience, it's recommended to drink a warm cup of tea, and that helps to relax your throat and ease your speaking voice. Also remember to have a bottle of water or a glass next to you. Especially if you're going to be speaking for long periods of time, you may feel that you need to take a sip of water from time to time. It's important to have it readily available to you so that in order to quench your thirst. Utilizing humor. The use of humor is a fabulous tool when going to present to an audience. It helps to relax your audience and really, break through that ice as well if you have to do that. But making sure that in your humor, it's appropriate to your audience. So you really have to know who you're speaking to first. But humor is a great tool to use. Principles of an effective communication. Effective presentations consist of verbal and visual components. It is important to include both, and if possible, because various individuals respond differently to each component. For example, some people learn better with visual aids, and some through words, and still others through a combination of both. So it's important to make sure that we're catering to all types and suited components and what people and how they learn best. Verbal presentation. The verbal element of your presentation clarifies and explains your thoughts and ideas. So when addressing your audience, consider how to make your core thoughts clear and concise. Following a format or a plan often allows your ideas to flow rather than cause confusion. So whether your verbal element of the presentation is written or verbal, it is important to avoid complex or uncommon vocabulary and run on sentences that present difficulty. Visual elements should be simple and not distracting, so it's important to keep that balance. A simple and creative visual can spark ideas throughout your audience that would not otherwise be awakened. So visuals can also be a great way to include your audience in the presentation rather than having them just listen to you. So it's good to break that up a little bit. Body language is also another component which adds to congruence with spoken words. Unfortunately, though, everyone agrees to the power of body language in communication. However, very few people and cultures actually use it. So let's embrace it in our presentations. Now, finally, the review of our presentation. The final step in our presentation is to measure the success. At one level, the success or failure of your presentation should be obvious rather quickly. Either your audience did what you asked them to or they did not. Informally, another measure of success is to observe the quality in the discussion that accompanied or followed your presentation. So how do we capture the effectiveness of our presentation? What methods can we use? In some cases, you can use a focus group interview, one-on-one interviews with participants and other personnel involved in your presentation, and also written feedback provided by participants. So we have a clip here, How to Avoid Death by PowerPoint by David J.P. Phillips. Now, I highly recommend you clicking and having a look at this video. I will mention to you that it is about 20 minutes long, so it's a nice way to wrap up our presentation here on Make a Presentation, and it gives you some real key points on, what are some of the pitfalls of PowerPoint presentations? So, and how do we create a really good balance and dynamic when we're speaking? So check it out. All you need to do is click on the embedded film there and sit and have a listen. Now that concludes the presentation here. I will just mention to you that if you have any questions about this unit or any of the components of your induction, my name's Siani Martin and I am your trainer for the induction class. So you can simply email me at c.martin@envirotech.edu.au if you have any questions. Now let's move on to our activities.